U.S. weapons have conducted their first strike inside Russia. But is Putin in full cope mode? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's get into it. Now, I know I've been using the word cope to describe a Russian, rhetoric lately, but that's exactly what it is, because that's about all they can resort to. Ukraine has used U.S. weapons to strike targets inside of Russia, according to a senator and a Western official. This is from the Toronto Star, but I think they mean a U.S. senator, right? Because this article is wholesale taken from AP, right? What is interesting is that the weapons were used under guidance that had been issued by President Joe Biden that allowed American weapons to be hit targets inside Russia for the limited purpose of defending Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city. Now, I think this is interesting because, again, this is not an accident, right? This information is public because the U.S. administration wants Russia to understand this is a limited, delineated policy that exists in response to Russia playing stupid games, right? Russia fucked around when it massed an army 1 kilometer over the border in order to conduct this Kharkiv offensive. Here's the map, right? These forces massed not exactly, but 1 to 2 kilometers over the border. And Ukrainian officials said, we sat there and watched them do it. And Russia was like, well, you can't hit us with any of your serious weapon systems because we're right inside the border here. And so this is a logical consequence of doing this action, right? Russia played this game, fucked around, and now they're finding out that, in fact, U.S. policy is willing to say, listen, this is exactly what you would expect to happen if you do this. Right. And so for Putin, this is, again, there's a Russian-backed narrative that says that this action is a dangerous escalation or an unprecedented use of U.S. weapons or whatever. It's not. This is a completely logical consequence, right? Here's an analogy. Imagine you're in your house and you notice a suspicious-looking person. Drive up, get out, stand on the curb, right on the edge of your property. And then his buddies come out, right? He gets more and more friends gathering around. And you have to sit there and watch it. You call the police, and the police say, sorry, he's not on your property, you can't do anything. Right? And then only when all 12 or 15 of his friends have shown up do they charge onto your property, kick down your door, and steal your house, rob your house. Right? Now, the next time they do that, right? The next time you see 2 or 3 of his friends gathered there, you're going to go, listen, I know what's happening. I know what's about to happen. And luckily for you, the U.S. there is no international law. So the U.S. says, okay, they bamboozled us once, but now we're authorizing you. You can defend your property because you know this is a threat. You know this threat is coming. And so then you could take action to defend yourself from that gang. That is exactly what's happening here, right? And if you in this story, if you feel bad for the robbers, if you go, the robbers they're the real victims here. No, like nobody thinks that. So why would you think that when it's Russia? Okay. So this is why these strikes are happening, right? It is a completely logical consequence of a completely anticipated reaction to Putin's actions. And likely he planned these sort of spin doctor narratives. But we're going to talk about the spin doctor narratives in a second. But the important thing to understand is that defending Kharkiv, as we've seen, stretches quite a ways, right? It stretches all the way up to Sumy, right? Anything that's going to be along this kind of northern front line. We've seen a number of these. And while some Western officials have had slightly different interpretations of how their weapons can be used, the important thing for Ukraine is to sit there and go, okay, we know that we have authorization to use our weapons to strike all in this region. So why we can allocate other weapon systems to other regions where we might need to defend ourselves, right? So I think this is a positive development for Ukraine, and you know that it's working because Putin is in full cope and seethe mode. He's warning. He says, we could provide weapons to strike NATO allies, right? He demanded a meeting with a bunch of press officials where he raved about that using these weapons could lead to, quote, very serious problems. It also says Putin reaffirmed Moscow's readiness to use nuclear weapons if it sees a threat to its sovereignty. Again, this is another classic Putin cope. You notice that we've had Russia's nuclear threats literally, I'm going to say, on at least a monthly basis through all kinds of different things. But you notice this isn't actually a threat. Notice his statements. They're not actually threats. Moscow is ready to use nuclear weapons to defend its sovereignty. But join me in looking at the map for a minute. Zoom the map way out. Let's zoom it way out. Right? Now, in this conflict, which country is having its sovereignty threatened? Which country doesn't control its sovereign territory? Not the West. The West controls all of their internationally recognized borders. And Russia is fully in control of all of its internationally recognized borders. There is no sustained Ukrainian presence on any Russian sovereign territory. You've had a few limited raids, and you've had indirect fire strikes on military targets. The only country whose sovereignty is threatened right now is Ukraine. And you may recall, Ukraine is also the only country whose sovereignty Russia guaranteed in the 90s. They told Ukraine, oh, if you give up your nuclear weapons, your sovereignty guaranteed. Done. Perfect. Obviously, that wasn't worth the paper it's printed on, and Putin's nuclear threats also aren't worth it, right? The reason is simple, is because, the U.S. has the same policy, by the way. If someone was to launch a nuclear strike or even a conventional attack on a NATO ally, right, then the U.S.'s policy is, we're going to defend that ally with like commensurate force. So if you launch a conventional attack, conventional NATO forces will move through Europe to defend it, because that's how NATO works. And if Putin was to decide to nuke Warsaw, that would be treated as though Putin had nuked New York. And the U.S. isn't ambiguous. Their nuclear deterrence policy is explicit. So when you see these kind of things, and remember, here's the thing, no country wants nuclear war. So if you don't want nuclear war, but you have these weapons to defend yourself, what sort of policy will you communicate? Again, use your own home as an example. The United States, a lot of people have firearms in the home, and they're legally allowed to use them. Now, if your goal was to create if your goal was to not shoot somebody, or you didn't really have a firearm and your goal was to bluff, you'd say, well, I might shoot you. I might shoot you dead now. I might shoot you dead later. But if you actually were planning on carrying out a threat and you didn't want to shoot somebody, you'd say, hey, man, if you come onto my property, I can use lethal force to defend it. Or I will use lethal force to defend it. Right? You will draw clear boundaries. You'll say, if you come any closer to my family, I will shoot you. Right? And that is the clear delineation that you can use to prevent an escalation. It's part of game theory. It's been known since the 50s that basically a clear policy allows parties to move seamlessly past each other. And the U.S. has a pretty clear policy of don't nuke us, we won't nuke you, right? They have a carve out that says no first strike. That's in case someone builds some sort of non-nuclear super weapon, or some other kind of thing that enables them to threaten, again, like the sovereignty of the United States. So that is the thing to take away from this, is that Putin just loves talking out his ass. And here's the other threat. Sorry, I'm really bothered by this because they're so stupid and people are taking them so seriously. That Putin claimed that Putin claimed that using some Western supplied weapons involved military personnel of those countries controlling the missiles and selecting targets, which is not true. And he knows this. And therefore, Moscow said it could take asymmetric steps elsewhere in the world. U.S. military said, no, when we give them to Ukraine, it's up to them. And what he's talking about, what Putin's describing, is Putin says, well, we could give the enemies of the West long-range weapons as well. And they could use them on the West, right? And this, the answer is what country, again, consult the map, what country is going to launch long-range weapons against the West? Are they going to give it to Belarus? You think Belarus is going to really want to catch that smoke, right? Would it really want to test NATO readiness? Do you think that would go well for Belarus? Who else could they give it to? What, Moldova? The hell's Moldova going to do, right? And what will it achieve exactly, right? Maybe you say, well, what if they provide them to Iran? Guys, Iran's already doing that, by the way. Iran already has that policy of providing long-range, sophisticated weapons to third-party actors to strike the West. We know this playbook, right? Those anti-ship ballistic missiles, you think they were made in a Houthi garage? No, they're Iranian, and they're provided to the Houthis. And look what happened, right? Iranian Shahed drones, they launched 200 of them, 300 of them? Long-range weapons, just as the same ones Russia uses. And what happened to them? Nothing. They got fired at Israel and they all got shot down. That's it. So Putin's just playing games. He's talking out his ass. And that, I think, is the thing to take away from this. And we're going to talk for a minute about why even Putin knows he's full of shit, right? Putin knows he's just talking out his ass. The West does. But here's the thing. Putin, this is the best Putin's ever been. But if you're interested in seeing some of the footage from combat in Ukraine, we're going to be taking a look at that on combatvetnews.com. You guys know I don't get that many sponsors here on the channel because I cover war content. YouTube also loves demonetizing my content. Again, war. But I rely on you guys to support me. And if you want, twice a week, I go for the viral combat videos, uncensored, and usually they are really fresh. So like within less than a week old. Gives us a perspective of the front line that we can't get anywhere else. Obviously, we got the specialist tier, $5 will get you access to everything. But if you really want to support the channel, we've got the lieutenant tier and the colonel tier. You guys get the shout outs at the end of every video. We're looking at piloting some additional benefits for those lieutenant and colonel tier. So get in now while the getting's good. And a huge thank you to all you guys. The link is in the description if you want to sign up because a new video drops today. Okay, so the one thing I wanted to point out here that I think is to me one of the most important aspects of this is that even though Russia's been incurring a lot of casualties, they are on the offensive. In fact, Russia has had the most steady, progressive, systematic gains across the front line that we've seen. Right? You see them advancing here near Skokiel. Now, you notice none of these areas are even remotely strategically valuable. They're not even operationally valuable. But, they're tactical successes. They're advances. You could see here, this is a real tactical advance. They've crossed this water obstacle here near Arkhangelsk. I thought Ukraine was going to be able to use this as a anchor in defending, but it seems like Ukraine may just be trying to have just a more dynamic defense. So interesting stuff to see. Again, Putin's sitting there and going, listen, our current strategy is working, and we really just don't want it to be fucked with. Right? You can see minor advances here in Krasnohorivka, and Russia's on the offensive. This is the most success they've had in this conflict in months. And to be clear, it's success is with a big asterisk. They're taking more casualties than ever. And frankly, if you took the total area that Russia has annexed in the last month and a half, and put it in a circle or a square, you could walk around that circle in like a day, maybe two, right? It's literally 200 square kilometers, a 20 by 10 area. So let's not overstate the Russian scale of success here. And to do that, by the way, Russia's lost, what did the last number say? About 30, something like 30,000 casualties. So, you know, they only had to clear out half a small city to do it. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thanks to the Colonel tier members at combatvetnews.com. Thanks to the Lieutenant tier members. And thanks to all the members of Combat Vet News. I couldn't do it without you. Subscribe to the channel, please. And like the video. It helps. See ya.